To the member for Braddon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I concur with the member for Lyons, who raised some very valid and accurate factual points to support the amendments to this bill. As Secretary of Labor's Australian Jobs Task Force, I get the honour and the privilege to hear some very heartfelt stories of workers who have been victims of exploitation by workers, of exploitation by the employer, of exploitation, non-compliance in the workforce. These are the stories that really make you think, what is going wrong in this country? What can a government do to ensure that we do have compliance in our labour market? These are stories that pull at your heartstrings when you hear about the impact it has on these individuals, on their lives, on their mental well-being. It's absolutely astounding that we can sit here in this place, and particularly those on the other side, not even be prepared to go out and speak to these people face to face and hear those stories. And yet we're putting in place a bill that clearly doesn't go far enough. So I welcome the opportunity to speak about this legislation, as protecting vulnerable workers should be an important role for this parliament. Labor is supporting the legislation, and while it does contain some measures to protect vulnerable workers, like increased penalties and strengthening the evidence-gathering powers of the Fair Work Ombudsman, as I said before, it just doesn't go far enough. When you hear these stories, you have to question, why does this not go far enough? And I question the legitimacy of this government putting in place a bill where they are not really prepared to go out and speak to these workers and listen to the stories that they tell. I know that flattery is the best form of imitation, but in some cases, and the parts of the bill that we do agree with, when you're pretending to be Labor when you're not, it just doesn't cut it. The Coalition pretends to care about workers, and I can say they don't, particularly about vulnerable workers, because they're not out there listening to these stories. At the 2016 election, Labor developed a comprehensive suite of policies to protect vulnerable workers, combating sham contracting, licensing labour hire companies, shutting down the practice of companies phoenixing to avoid wage liabilities, reforming the Fair Work Act to strengthen protection for workers, criminalising employee conduct that involves the use of coercion or threats during the commission of serious contraventions of the Fair Work Act in relation to temporary overseas workers, and making it easier for workers to recover unpaid wages for employers and directors of responsible companies. These are the things we need to be addressing. You have to ask the question, if the Coalition was truly serious about protecting vulnerable workers, why are these measures not included in this legislation? Companies phoenixing to avoid wage liabilities is just one issue that needs addressing. A phoenix company is one that rises from the ashes of a failed company. It then begins trading as an identical business from the same location with a similar trading name as the other company. The assets of the former company are transferred to the new company and no consideration is paid for those assets. The old company then enters liquidation and leaves a number of creditors unpaid. This practice is wrong, and it is wrong for two reasons. There is the financial loss suffered by the creditors of the former company when they go unpaid, and nearly in all cases the workers also miss out on their entitlements. It is also unfair for the competitors of the Phoenix company if a company is not paying its tax debts or trade creditors than its cost base is lowered, usually to an extent that a competitor can't match its pricing. In my electorate, one such company went into voluntary administration. As a result, it avoided creditor payments, including employees' entitlements. One creditor was a competitor. I don't know how the so-called party of business would support these types of practices when other local businesses are being disadvantaged. This company transferred the employees to the new company, but with a catch. Under the old company, all employees, permanent, casual and seasonal, were all covered under a single agreement. Under the new arrangement, the so-called new company negotiated a new agreement, but split the workers off into two different tiers, permanent and casual. Despite doing the same job at the same place, there are now two different employment arrangements. And of course, the most vulnerable workers, the seasonal and casual ones, are worse off than what they were under the formal arrangements. The exploitation of vulnerable workers is a nationwide issue, and it reminds me of an example of seasonal workers in Queensland recently that made the headlines when a director of that company were treating those workers so poorly that the system actually worked in that instance. But there are many examples where the system doesn't work. In the Queensland example, we had seasonal workers that were found to be living in inappropriate accommodation. These are workers from the South Sea. They were here, some of them had borrowed money to come to Australia to work, and they were found that a majority of those workers had not been paid a single cent for the 6 months prior. Not 1 cent. In some of the other workers, a small minority, they will pay between $50 and $300 in cash for that 6 months' work. Now that is appalling. That is happening under this government's watch. And unfortunately, it is not the only case where that is happening. They were living in pretty ordinary accommodation where they were all cramped in together. They were paying fees if they were those that were getting paid the small amount of fees. They will charge a small amount to pay for some of that work. But clearly some of those, well actually those that did end up going home, went home in debt. And unfortunately in my electorate I hear of stories of the knee vans doing some of the seasonal work, in some cases where they're getting charged exorbitant charges for transportation. So when you have a bus of 20 knee vans where they're getting charged around $100 a week to travel 10 kilometres to the farm, you have to wonder what is going on there. Why are these people then, at the end of the week, left with nothing? Absolutely nothing. They're paying exorbitant fees for their accommodation, for their transportation, for food and other things while they're doing that work, which is really important work, and they're treated this way where they actually are left with nothing in their pocket at the end of the week. As part of the Jobs Task Force, I was in Queensland recently and heard of a story of a cleaner. She stuck her neck out through the union who supported her to do this, where she realised she was not getting paid the right rate, particularly for those after-hours shifts. She was being terribly underpaid. So she stuck her neck out and said, this is not right. So what happened? Her shifts were reduced. But what the union did was actually investigate this further and found that this did not apply just to her. This applied to this multinational company to thousands of other workers that were not paid the correct rate of pay. So one person who thought, this is not right for me, has actually made the situation for thousands of other workers better. And that is because of the support of the union. And I think we really need to start thinking about why is the government in particular bashing unions when they seem to be the only body in this country with the resources and actually the interest to be fighting for workers and actually doing the compliance. This is the problem. No one is really resourced enough, other than unions, to ensure that employers are being compliant in their obligations. And we have workers who are feeling insecure in their work because they are, in most cases, casual workers who are completely exploited, who are paid under the award, and yet they don't know it, and if they stick their neck out, they get treated like this lady and start getting reduced shifts and a financial loss. But in this case, this one person was brave enough to stand up and say that is not okay, and the unions were there to support her. So I say to the other side, stop bashing unions and actually get to understand what they do, their role that they play in the Australian labour market, ensuring that someone out there is ensuring that employers are being compliant. Because I tell you what, no one else is doing it sufficient enough. You have to ask the question, and as I've raised many examples right now, how many other shocking examples of exploitation of vulnerable workers are out there? But Mr Deputy Speaker, there is another huge gaping hole in this legislation that does not protect a group of vulnerable workers under attack by this government, those workers that rely on penalty rates. These workers are some of the lowest paid in our community, yet this government is happy to support the cutting of their take-home pay. In Tasmania, around 40,000 Tasmanians stand to lose up to $77 a week. And for those on the other side, they may not think that's a lot of money, but I tell you what, the workers that I speak to know the value of that $77, and that is huge. That is the difference between their ability to fund their school lunches for the week, to put petrol in their car. It makes a massive difference to their lives. In my electorate, the old census data revealed there are over 7,500 workers in the retail, food and accommodation industries. Have no doubt that this figure will increase when the latest census is released, with the increasing trend of using casual and part-time workers. Tasmania already has some of the lowest paid workers in Australia. The McKell Institute has found a partial abolition of penalty rates will result in a loss of disposable income in the Tasmanian economy of between $15 million to almost $30 million per annum. And you have to ask yourself, for me, as a member of a regional electorate, the impact of that on my economy and my electorate is huge. The small businesses out there really need to understand what this means for them. That is less money going through their tills at the end of the day, and they need to really understand that this is an economy where you need to support your workers. You need to get that money flowing through, because these workers will spend every cent that they have in the local economy supporting small businesses. So how is this loss of these incomes from cities and regional communities be good for local business and economies? It just gets worse, however. This government supporting for cutting penalty rates will disproportionately affect women. Women dominate the sectors that will have their wages cut: hospitality, retail, fast food and pharmacy. So I beg the question, if the Prime Minister is so keen on supporting women and talks about women in a way that he actually values women as participants in the workforce, why is he not then saying we shouldn't be supporting this wage cut? On average, women already earn less than 17% than men, so how does it make sense to further cut the wage of low-paid women? But this government seems very happy to make low-paid women struggle even further just to get by. Another story, as in my role as Secretary of Australia Jobs Task Force, was speaking to a nurse. Now, you might not think they're not being affected by the penalty rates cuts, but when they're going there and working long shifts, 24 hours a day, every day of the week, you have to wonder, that they are thinking in the back of their mind, are we next? I had a nurse that I spoke to as part of our hearings around penalty rates, and she recalled a situation recently over Easter where she spent the evening on the oncology ward in a local hospital in Melbourne. She got home on the Sunday morning feeling pretty tired, mentally drained, and then thought, how can I enjoy the festivities of my family after working a really long shift in that environment, looking after those people? And she started to think about the value of her work, and the payment of penalty rates really for her was the only way of that recognition of the value of the work she did. Being away from her family over Easter, coming home in an emotional and drained state, and not being able to enjoy those celebrations, she thought penalty rates is really the only recognition that I have. And we love nurses, we all love nurses and value the work they do, but when you're feeling that penalty rates are being attacked by those and supported by those on the other side, she starts to question the value of what she's doing, and her daughter wants to become a nurse. And she's actually advising her not to do it, because she's concerned that in the future her work will not be valued. And for me, that just, she broke down in tears. We were all in tears at the table when we heard this story. And so you have to start to question, what is the value of penalty rates? It is far more than money. She never once mentioned the dollars that she got through those penalty rates. She talked about the recognition of the value of the work she does by being there overnight with patients who are receiving palliative care. So I say to those on the other side, really start going out there in your electorates and talking to these workers, talking to workers that are being exploited. Start listening to those workers who are receiving penalty rates. Do yourself a favour. You might actually increase your votes at the next election. You might even save your seats at the next election.
Settle down.
Well, I'm saying to you, If you're going to make this country great again, go out there and start listening to these people. It's the least you can do. Thank you.